Thank goodness indeed.
Yep. I like your picture of Ruth Bader Ginsburg behind you.
Thank you.
Makes me happy.
Yes, yeah. Very.
I hope we have more coming because I've had already 4 calls of how to log on.
Oh, yeah.
So
Such a lovely night.
That's all.
Imagine it.
Hi,
Some post
Karen.
up at the back.
So no, I told you right off the bat, I think it's a really great idea. It would just be depending on, you know, it's a very unsettled time right now.
We would need something with a beautiful cancellation.
Oh,
Hello, Judy Schwartz. Wow.
Oh, Karen Morris, how are you? Will you forgive me? I wanted to, I took out a festival pass for Gateways. Do you ever go to Gateways Music Festival?
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. So there's a concert tonight that's at 7:30 or something like that. So I will be here for most of you, but then I'm going to scoot to that. There's so much going on. It's amazing.
All of a sudden, I'm zooming out.
There's Jiva and there's Gateways and there's the RPO and yeah.
I think there's something from Federation also.
There is.
Yeah.
There is something at the Federation. There was something, good at the Federation at 7:30, but I can't remember.
Oh, really?
I knew I couldn't do it. Oh, it might be the women's, the annual.
It's not the women's, it was
The giving event.
the women. One to the people, but they should coordinate everything.
Well, there used to be a calendar at the Federation and every single Jewish organization had to clear their event with the Federation to be sure there was no
It's all women.
conflict. I bet they don't do that anymore. I don't know. Hi, John Claire.
Hi there. Hi. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Good to see everybody.
Oh my gosh, Karen. Oh my gosh. Bob.
Karen Lessick. Hello, Karen Lessick.
33. Good job, Karen. 33. When they were happy.
So this is a Chavurah from Sinai. Is that, and it's women only? What a lovely.
Carol Yunker, you're muted.
And how frequently do you meet and what kinds of things do you do?
Carol Yunker, you're
Okay. Can you hear me now?
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So it's an organization from Temple Sinai, and even though it's called the Women's Chavurah, everything is open to all congregants, and we always say on every program, not for women only. So we do get many men at a lot of our different programs, and it's like a sisterhood, except that we're not officially affiliated with the National Sisterhood, but it's like a sisterhood at another temple would be.
Lovely.
And we do monthly meetings, different sorts, and you're our third Zoom presentation. We've had a couple other, because our schedule got all screwed up because we couldn't do our programs anymore. So here we are.
Wow, interesting. And I'm honored to be your third. What was the first and the second?
One of them was, do you know Lauren Lieberman? She runs a program called Campabilities. She's from Brockport, from Brockport State College, and it's for kids who have hearing and visual impairment. And
adults.
What?
And adults.
Adults.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. And she received a Fulbright scholarship recently, and she went to 3 different countries. She was in Africa. I'm trying to remember with the 3 places where, and she's starting programs all over the world, actually. And so
Wow.
she did a presentation for us telling us about, these new programs that she's starting. And, with slides and things like that. It was really interesting. The second one was Janet Nemitz, who is one of our congregants, and she's written a memoir. And so she talked about memoir writing, both in prose and poetry, and then gave us an opportunity to do some writing on our own, sort of a guided exercise. So that was really, really nice. And tonight it's you.
Oh. Hmm. Fun
And we have
program.
35 people.
Should we start? It's about 7:05, or do you want to wait a couple more minutes? You want to start?
Start.
Okay, all right. So, welcome everybody. We're delighted to have you again, seeing you, and I say seeing you on Zoom again for one of our Women's Chavurah programs. Tonight, we are delighted to have Judge Karen Morris with us. And her topic is a sampling of legal issues born of the pandemic. We are going to make a donation in Karen's honor to thank her for doing this. Her choice was an organization called Ticket to Ride. And this is a group that raises money to buy things like bus passes for indigent, I'm reading this from what Karen wrote to me, indigent, justice impacted individuals. And this gives them access to transportation so they can go to their court dates, so they can go to treatment sessions, parole and probation appointments, job training, things like that. So this, enables them to even get a better chance of helping themselves by not, suffering because they can't get transportation to their different appointments. So we're delighted to make a donation in Karen's honor to that. If you have any questions during this program, we're going to ask that you put them in the chat, and then Karen will answer them at the end of the program so that we don't interrupt. And if everybody would please mute themselves, that would be helpful so we don't get a lot of background interference. So again, Karen, thank you for coming. And I hope everybody notices the beautiful backdrop behind Karen. It's so fitting and so perfect for this. I'm going to turn this over now to Monica Katzel, and she is going to introduce Karen formally. So
Well, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Karen. I think that there isn't anyone on the Zoom program tonight who doesn't know who she is. Karen is, as many of you know, town justice in Brighton, a professor of law at Monroe Community College, and an author. She has written several textbooks and co-authors a treatise for lawyers on New York criminal law. She writes a column for Hotel and Motel Management magazine, this I didn't know, and a blog for Cengage Publishing Company. She also published Law Made Fun Through Harry Potter's Adventures and Law Made Fun Through Downton Abbey. And I believe you gave those talks during a Jewish book festival. Am I right?
Yes, and also at Sinai, at Temple Sinai. Once.
Oh, right. So many of us have heard you, and some of us know you personally as town justice. My son Evan had the not so wonderful honor of appearing before you for a traffic violation, but then all was well when Karen married them. And so that is my connection to Karen Morris, a personal connection. Professor Morris is past president of several organizations, including the Greater Rochester Association for Women Attorneys and Text and Academic Authors Association, a national organization that advances the interests of academic content providers. Her favorite volunteer activities include being a big sister in the Big Brother program, which she has done for 24 years, serving lunch on Mondays at the Salem Soup Kitchen and entertaining children as a magician for not-for-profit agencies. She received her Juris Doctor degree from St. John's University and earned a Master's of Law in Trade Regulation from New York University. She previously was in-house counsel for Macy's department store. This I didn't know either, and still misses her employee discount and participating in the Thanksgiving Day parades. She also served as an assistant district attorney in Monroe County and an attorney in private practice. She is the recipient of numerous awards from students, the State University of New York, the Monroe County Bar Association, and Text and Academic Authors Association. She was the first community college professor in New York State to be designated a distinguished professor, and distinguished she is, and a fabulous presenter. So we all look forward to this talk this evening. Thank you, Judge Morris.
Thank you. Wow, thank you. That was a lovely introduction. And thank you for the donation to Ticket to Ride. The goal of that organization is to reduce the number of bench warrants that result from non-appearance at court dates or treatment appointments, parole meetings, with just $1 for a bus ride or $2 round trip. And actually we go for $3 and give the people a full day's ride. For $3, you can go anywhere for 24 hours. So we hope to eliminate nights in jail, disruption of lives, unnecessary expenditure of tax money to maintain those jails. So a little money goes a long way. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to talk about some legal issues that were born of the pandemic. I had a lot of fun doing the research on this. I've sort of been keeping articles along the way and reading up, but really focused in the last week as I prepare this. And there's just interesting legal issues that the pandemic has given birth to. For some, unfortunately, but nonetheless, there they are. A sort of theme of almost all of the different topics, and I'm going to address maybe 8 or 9 different topics. A theme is that government has what is called the police power, and that means that government is responsible for the health, the safety, and the welfare. 3 key words: health, safety, and welfare of the people. And when the health, safety, and welfare is at risk, government has added powers and the ability to impose restrictions and do what's necessary in order to protect our health, safety, and welfare. And of course, we are in a pandemic. Our health is all at risk, and government's role is to protect us. And in doing so, they can exercise powers that would not be available to government at other times. So that's our background. So the first topic that I'm going to address isn't government related. It is event cancellation. So I'll ask that you go to the first slide. Great, thank you. So, so many events have been canceled: concerts, sporting events, plays, things, musical events, things that we all now long to go to and have sorely missed. But many people bought tickets before the pandemic, and now the event was either canceled or postponed. People who had bought tickets want a refund, and not always is that refund available. Great, thank you. So the people have been frustrated in that they've not been getting their refunds, and the question is that legal? Ticketmaster was a place where many people had invested money in tickets, and of course, we all know for many of these events, the tickets are not inexpensive. Ticketmaster had very careful wording in its contracts. And the wording said, oh, somebody's saying they don't see any slides. If others don't see slides, let us know. So I'm looking at a slide, and me and RBG, I keep good company. I thought I would see all of you, but I don't. But hopefully you're seeing the slides. Let me do an aside on the slides. The slides are not critical. They're really, they don't contain critical information, but do help you to stay focused and kind of outline my comments. So Ticketmaster had in their contract that a buyer would be entitled to a refund if the event was canceled, but not if the event was postponed. And you may think, wow, I don't think I ever signed that kind of contract. No, you didn't, and you probably never read it. But when you bought tickets, you would have clicked on something that says, I agree. And it says, click on that, I agree. And then you can scroll down and read everything that you're agreeing to. I would bet few of you do that. And I admit I'm not an avid reader of all of that legalese. But in there is a provision that says that refunds are entitled when an event is canceled, but not when an event is postponed. And what most venues have done is postpone these events indefinitely. And when it's rescheduled, when we have a vaccine and we can all reconvene, these events presumably will be rescheduled, and you will be entitled as a ticket holder to a ticket to that rescheduled event. A lot of people are unhappy because nothing's being rescheduled anytime soon, but that is the terms of the contract that one enters with Ticketmaster, and Ticketmaster has not been giving refunds. There's also StubHub, which is the biggest market for ticket resales. I must say I don't understand fully how they work, but apparently they buy from people with tickets and then resell the tickets. Remember, I love Lady Gaga, and I once bought, the only ticket I could get was from StubHub, and I was way, way up in the balcony and paid probably 4 times what whoever originally bought the ticket paid for it, but I was happy to go. But that's as much as I know about StubHub. They had a provision that said if events were canceled, they would give a refund, and they have changed their rule and now are offering a coupon good for 120% of the cost of the ticket that you paid for. So they are not giving for canceled events a refund. They're giving this 120% benefit. So you get some added value to what you paid for, but you don't get the cash back. That has annoyed some folks, but we have to remember these companies were not the ones responsible for the pandemic, and of course take a huge, huge loss. There's multiple class actions pending against StubHub from groups that are trying to get their money back. A class action, of course, is a lawsuit with multiple plaintiffs. The airlines and hotels have been pretty good about giving refunds. Airbnb has been difficult. If you keep pressing, the experience seems to be that you will get a refund. However, if you make with Airbnb reservations after the beginning of the pandemic, so mid-March, the only way you'll get a refund is if either you or the host has come down with the virus since you made those reservations. So that is some information about event cancellations that have resulted from the pandemic. So I'll ask that we go to the next slide, and this one is price gouging. So you may remember early on, less so now, but early on, there were all sorts of sellers who were gouging prices. There was a Florida seller offering 15 of the N95 masks for $3,800. There was a convenience store in Massachusetts selling milk for $10 a gallon. Minnesota smoke shop charging $80 for 36 rolls of toilet paper. And other items that were price gouged, you can name it: hand sanitizers, disinfectant wipes, masks, chicken, eggs, rice, baby formula, diapers, cough suppressants, rubbing alcohol and aloe vera, which apparently can be combined to create a hand sanitizer. Well, it turns out there are 40 states, New York included, that have anti-gouging laws, and they vary from state to state. But New York law says that during periods of abnormal disruption of the market caused by extraordinary adverse circumstances, some parties within the chain of distribution of goods have taken unfair advantage. Such conduct is prohibited and subject to civil penalties. So what exactly is prohibited? And it is selling goods at, in the wording of the statute, an unconscionably excessive price. Exactly what that is unclear and not defined by the statute, but it applies to all parties within the chain of distribution. So what makes it unconscionably excessive? If it represents a gross disparity, that would disparity between the current price in the emergency situation and the prior price, or when the price grossly exceeds the price at which same or similar goods or services were readily obtainable in the trade area before the emergency occurred. The statute is enforced by the Attorney General. The penalties are substantial. They're up to $25,000 per violation, and plus restitution for the aggrieved party. Early on, there were 30 attorneys general from various states, that 30 states sent letters to Facebook, Amazon, Craigslist, eBay, and Walmart, urging them all to crack down on price gouging on their sites. Amazon had suspended 3,900 sellers who were price gouging. In New York City, they have a rule: the maximum increase in the event of an emergency situation is 10%, with a $500 fine per item sold that was sold at higher than that 10%. They've issued 550 violations and collected hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. Inspectors from the Department of Consumer Affairs in New York City goes around visiting stores undercover to look for the price gouging. If a business is raising its price significantly because its suppliers raise their price, that would be a defense to a price gouging claim. But otherwise, price gouging is illegal and is being enforced. I remember during 9/11, there were a lot of people, I had a student actually, but a lot of people were caught in New York and unable to fly out. I had a student who rented a car in order to get back to Rochester, and the price was so gouged, it was huge what he had to pay. So fortunately, there are laws that restrict and the price increases, and there's an enforcement scheme and significant consequences. So hopefully most businesses are discouraged from price gouging. Okay, let's go to our next slide. And the next topic is release of prisoners. I'm fascinated by this. The prisons are like breeding grounds for the virus. People are at close quarters. There have been 42,000 cases of the virus in prisons, 42,000, and 510 prisoners died as of July. That's not even counting these the last several months. So many defendants are asking the courts for early release in order to avoid exposure. And in order to, and many of these requests are being granted. The defendant must show extraordinary or compelling circumstances that could not reasonably have been foreseen by the court at the time of sentencing, and clearly pandemics running wild in prisons would fall into that category. And they must show that the public will not be exposed to undue risk. And it is the sentencing judge. The request for early release goes back to the judge who sentenced the defendant. And these are the types, I'm going to tell you the types of things that the judge considers, and then I'll give you some examples. So factors that the judge considers: the inmate's health condition. Do they have risk factors cited by the Center for Disease Control that expose somebody unduly to the virus? Excuse me. The correctional facility's record of COVID cases. Is COVID running wild in the prison, or has this particular facility been good about taking steps to contain it? What preventive measures are in place in the facility? In other words, if they didn't have cases, were they just lucky, or is it because of appropriate precautions? And then the inmate's criminal record and disciplinary record while in prison are reviewed. Usually, but not always, if early release is granted from prison, home confinement or post-release supervision, parole is imposed. So here are some examples of people who did obtain early release and did not obtain early release. A defendant by the name of Lee Farkas, he's 67. He was a financial executive responsible for one of the largest frauds prosecuted out of the mortgage fraud financial crisis a decade ago. He was responsible for losses of up to $3 billion by banks and individuals. A nonviolent crime, but a dastardly one for sure. He had served 9 of 30 years of his sentence. In the prison he was in, there was an outbreak of the coronavirus. He had health problems that were cited by the CDC. He was released early. Another is a guy from Rochester, Donald McKinney. Some of these names may be familiar to you. His charge was drug possession. He was found with 50 grams of methamphetamine. He had a lengthy criminal record, including prior felony drug trafficking convictions. He cooperated with the government, assisting them in seeking prosecutions against some of his cohorts in crime. He served 18 months of a 10-year term when he requested early release. He suffered from several illnesses and was in a wheelchair. He was especially susceptible to contracting the virus because of his physical conditions. His sentence was reduced to time served. He was released, but had to serve and is serving 5 years of parole. Parole is where, of course, you're released from jail, but you have this parole officer as a defendant to whom the defendant has to report with various degrees of regularity. Could be weekly, monthly. Usually it was in person. I'm sure today most of these meetings are done via Zoom. The parole officer can come unannounced at any time to make sure that the defendant is meeting any curfew requirements, is doing whatever is required for that early release. It might be job training, it might be some other working or some other requirements. Another one, Louis Quintera, was charged with drug and weapons charges, and then he violated parole. He was for violation of parole. In other words, he was convicted, he served some time, he was released on parole. He violated that parole, which brought a 1-year sentence. He was serving the 1-year sentence to end in January of 2021 when COVID hit. He had significant medical issues, and the facility had multiple system failures in trying to contain the illness. It was not doing a good job. And given that he had limited time on his sentence, he sought to be released. The prosecution argued that he was a danger to the community. The judge said, well, he's probably no more dangerous now, which might have been a few months ago, than he would be in January, which wasn't very far down the road when he was going to be released in the normal course. So he was from Rochester. He was in jail elsewhere. Prison was ordered to pay his fare to Rochester, where his dad lives, and he was required to quarantine for 2 weeks. Another guy, 25 years, he was serving 25 years on a drug charge with extensive previous criminal record, no pre-existing medical conditions, not a single case of the virus in the compound where he was serving his time. He was not released early. Also denied was a defendant charged with enticing a minor to engage in sex. He had 21-year sentence. He had served a third of it. He had pre-diabetes and asthma, but these were not issues that complicated or exposed him to greater risk, according to the CDC, and therefore he was not released. There was a death row inmate in Tennessee convicted of rape and murder, and his execution was scheduled for August 4th. He sought, interestingly, a postponement of the execution. He said he hadn't been able to meet with friends, family, his attorney, or spiritual advisor because of the pandemic. He was unable, his lawyer, because of the pandemic and the closing of courts for a while, was unable to prepare a clemency application to the governor, asking that his sentence be reconsidered. And the prison hadn't yet provided information on how it was going to carry out the death penalty in this COVID time. So the court denied his extension, but the governor interceded, and his execution was postponed until the end of December. The governor said, due to the challenges and disruptions caused by the COVID pandemic. Interesting, then there's Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby's lawyers argued for his release. He's serving a 3 to 10 year sentence in a Pennsylvania prison for drugging and sexually assaulting that Temple University coach in 2004. He is 82, he's blind, he's got underlying medical conditions. Due to the blindness, he can't socially distance. He takes medication for high blood pressure, an issue with the COVID. But the governor did authorize a temporary reprieve for vulnerable and nonviolent prisoners who were at their close to their release date. That was the conditions for that governor in Pennsylvania. Sex crimes were excluded, and Bill Cosby continues to sit in jail. One other one of interest is Harvey Weinstein. He's 68, the movie producer. He's serving a 23-year term for sex crimes. He tested positive for the virus in a New York prison. He's actually at Wendy Correctional Center in Erie County, a maximum security prison. But he was to be extradited to California because of another assault charge there. That the jail he would have gone to in California had a number of cases. Wendy apparently is controlling the cases significantly, so his extradition has been postponed. So interesting issues, I think, on the release of prisoners. Next slide is landlord-tenant issues. So many people, this is really such a dilemma for landlords and for tenants. And our government and various agencies are trying to come up with a fair, balanced approach that doesn't put either the landlord or the tenant in an untenable position. You may think that's been achieved or may not think that's been achieved. But many people have lost their job. They don't have ability to pay rent. Responses in many states, including New York, soon after the pandemic hit and all the closings occurred, was to put a freeze on residential and commercial evictions. So tenants were protected against evictions. Rent continued to accumulate, and many times tenants were not able to pay it, but landlords were unable to collect or unable to evict non-paying tenants. So you can see the issue if you were not otherwise familiar with it. Landlords have expenses too. They need to pay their mortgage. They need to pay other expenses associated with the building, taxes, upkeep. And so landlords were unhappy. Landlords sued the governor and lost that. Again, because of the government's responsibility to protect our health, safety, and welfare, the court ruled that the governor had the ability to freeze evictions, as was done here and done in many other states. In Brighton Town Court, we regularly hear evictions. There was a fair number of apartments in Brighton, and not a heavy number end up in evictions, but maybe one or two every other week of evictions the court sees. All of that was put on hold. We had absolutely no authority to handle any cases involving evictions. What seems to be the thing that's needed is rent assistance, that if there was, and both sides were petitioning the government to intervene and provide tenants or landlords, however you look at it, with assistance in paying the rent. Had there been a second CARES Act, there was a lot of money that was earmarked in the planning for that for rent assistance. But of course, we haven't seen that second round of money from the government. Many tenants claim that they were harassed by their landlords. They got threatening emails, they got threatening text messages, threats to lock the tenants out, fake sheriffs coming to the door, somebody connected with the landlord rep dressed as a sheriff saying that the tenant was being evicted. Landlords threatened to notify immigration authorities if the rent was not paid and the tenant was not here legally. Utilities were shut off. It really was a very unfortunate circumstance. So again, yeah, that second Corona relief bill never came to be. Most moratoriums are over now. There is a very modified way of handling eviction cases now. First of all, the town courts no longer have jurisdiction. City court no longer has jurisdiction. Each county has set up a specialized court to handle these evictions, and they're staffed with a lot of volunteer attorneys who help represent the tenants. And New York has passed a law called the Tenant Safe Harbor Act. So this law allows, it provides a defense to some tenants who can't pay their rent. The tenant has to be experiencing a financial hardship. It has to have occurred because of COVID-19. And if the tenant fits those two requirements, then the judge can look at all of the factors and decide whether the tenant can be evicted, or the judge can decide that the tenant is entitled to stay in the housing and not be evicted. But again, the amount of rent continues to mount. So if the tenant can't pay the rent, at some point when COVID is over and hopefully jobs become more plentiful, that rent will be paid. But also the United Way, this is interesting, spends $800,000 annually to support local eviction prevention programs, including providing rent assistance. So they have upped their game, added money to that. And so there has been some relief for landlords, but still there are landlords, if the tenant still qualifies for this Safe Harbor Act, they've been lost their job because of COVID, and they may well end up being able to stay in the property, particularly if they were current with their rent up to the time they lost their job. And landlords hopefully will get some government and some United Way financial relief for that rent, but not always. And there are landlords that are taking the loss at this time. So that's landlord tenant issues. Let's go to intellectual property, which is the next, yeah. So intellectual property. Intellectual property refers to patents, trademarks, copyrights. These give creators the exclusive right to use and reproduce the things that creators and scientists produce from their, I call it, creative juices. So patents in particular protect scientific discoveries and technological advancements. They keep, because the patents exist, people and companies are encouraged to do research and do testing and spend money on research and development, because they have the exclusive right to make money from that, whatever it is that they produce. However, our economic system is based on competition. So we're giving somebody a monopoly, and that conflicts with our concept of competition. And so there's some tension between wanting creative people to create and giving them that exclusive right. So it's finite and it lasts for 20 years. I often think of Xerox. Xerox had that exclusive right for xerography that was developed for 20 years. After that, the science goes, we say, into the public domain. Anybody can use it, and significant competition results. But if we didn't give the patent and give that exclusive right, I think, wow, we'd probably all still be using dial-up telephones that are plugged into the wall. So these patents are important. So now, if you think about it in terms of COVID, there are many medical equipment and medications that are patented. This vaccine that was just announced, Pfizer is for sure going to have a patent on that vaccine. That gives them the exclusive right to produce, reproduce, copy, and market that product, which means a number of things. One, they can charge whatever price they want. So there is a fear that once a vaccine is developed, some countries with lower budgets are gonna be way at the end of the line before they ever get access to the vaccine. Also, one company can only produce so much of something. If we had companies, rather than competing to come up with this vaccine, but rather working together, sharing information, we might be able to get to the end result quicker. So there have been some developments in some governments to say, hey, when we have a health emergency, we should let go of patents and make sure that producers get some reasonable return on what they develop, but let everybody have access to it. So the production of the product is not finite and can be rapidly reproduced and distributed. And so that one company doesn't make a fortune at the expense of other companies. I sometimes think about when we were going way back in March, when Cuomo was trying to get the masks and the equipment, the coverings for the nurses and the medical personnel and the ventilators. And he was saying how there was so much competition. Other states would come in and they would be willing to pay more. And then another state came in and they're willing to pay more. And now what should have cost X is costing the state X many times X. That's because there are companies that had patents on whatever it was that was needed, and they were exercising their patent muscles. So many companies, many countries and the World Trade Organization have said, hey, let's find a way to resolve this patent issue, have everybody work together, make sure that everybody who contributes gets a reasonable return. Some countries have said that governments, scratch that, World Trade Organization has rules that allow governments to override patents for public health purposes. And the European Parliament said that in a pandemic, we should not be granting patents at all. Instead, let's pool rights in technologies and data globally. The result will be faster development of a vaccine and more equal outcomes for everybody. So that is a issue that remains and has not been resolved, but there are efforts to address how to compensate sufficiently those who are doing the work. And there is a talk about possible price controls once a vaccine comes out, something that our government rarely gets involved in. And another possible solution is compulsory licensing. Licensing is where one company authorizes another to utilize the patented development or discovery for a fee. So compulsory licensing would mean that the government could force the patent owner, it might be Pfizer with the new vaccine, to authorize others to make it in exchange for a reasonable fee, a price-controlled fee. And that way, more can be made faster and distributed quicker. So it's an interesting issue that's recognized and not resolved, though some efforts have been made to resolve it. Interesting, another intellectual product issue or intellectual property is copyrights. Copyright is the exclusive right to reproduce art, music, literature, movies, software. And like you, I'm sure, get lots of news online. Sometimes if I haven't bought a subscription to a particular provider, I can't read the article because the provider has, whether it's Huffington Post or Washington Post, has a copyright on the story and on the article, and they want you to pay, of course, to read it. But many of these suppliers of information have relaxed the exercise of the copyright during this time, so that information that's important relating to the pandemic can be shared and we can all have access to it. There's also the final intellectual property trademark, which is the exclusive right to a name. Interesting, Corona beer, early on when the coronavirus came to be, there were a lot of memes on the internet with folks making fun of coronavirus or wondering if there was any, of Corona beer, wondering if there was any connection. One of the memes involved, you open the refrigerator door and a little video online, and there were a number of Miller beers, and they all had masks on, and there was one Corona beer on the other side. So Corona was concerned that it might take a hit because of its name, Corona beer, with the virus. But don't cry for me, Argentina or Mexico. It turns out people are thinking about Corona, and their sales have gone up something like 20%. So that's interesting. Let me do one or two more because I see our time. I want to do, if you'll click through, I think, let's do one more, though that's an interesting one, business interruption insurance. But if you'll go one more. Great, restrictions on church gatherings. So this was, many governors set restrictions. New York was one of them on the number of people that could gather together in a religious service. And of course, much of religion involves people gathering together. The churches contested, a number of churches contested the restrictions, but in July, in a 5-4 decision, the United States Supreme Court upheld a restriction of 50 people at a church gathering. Interesting, in September, San Francisco was having some outbreaks and restricted the numbers of people who could be in a house of worship. Trump's Justice Department sought to reopen them and sent a letter to the mayor claiming that the restrictions may violate the First Amendment. That was after the U.S. Supreme Court case that upheld the restriction over arguments about First Amendment. So it was interesting. I think that Trump was trying to court the evangelical votes at the time and seeking to boost protections for faith groups unsuccessfully. Interesting, in October, you may remember this very recently, Governor Cuomo restricted the size of religious assemblies in a coronavirus hotspot that was challenged by rabbis and synagogues in New York City, particularly very religious ones. It happened right near the high holidays. The rabbis contested it and federal court upheld the restriction. And I must say, I suspect that your synagogue, and I'm a member of TBK, and we have Zoom services, and we've come to adjust and make the most of them, and they really are quite lovely. Mask mandates, there have been contest court cases contesting mandatory mask requirements, and most of those have been unsuccessful. There was an interesting one. Let me just see if I can find it. Yeah, so and then I'll stop here and take some questions. I'm aware of the time. Texas in June had a mask mandate put in place requiring masks for all public places. Now, fast forward November, polling places are masks required at polling places. The Blacks and Latinos wanted the mandate that masks be required in polling places. They wanted to vote, but they are at a higher risk of death and severe illness from the virus. Perhaps I view this as a voter suppression attempt. The Republican governor said no, masks are not required at voting places. The governor was then sued to attempt to require it. The first level of court said, yes, the masks are required. They're required in public. Voting is a public place. Of course, why wouldn't you wear a mask? Why would there not be a requirement? But then the governor appealed, and on appeal, the court said, even though there is this mandatory mask requirement in the state, not required for voting, we want people who don't want to wear a mask to be able to cast their ballot. So that was the issue with masks. And now one final thing, mandated vaccinations. We're getting closer, hopefully to a vaccination. And surveys show that 2/3 of adults say that they'll take the vaccination. There's discussion about mandatory vaccination. Will that be legal? There was a case going back into 1905, a landmark United States Supreme Court case that upheld the constitutionality of a state criminal law that required all adult inhabitants of Cambridge, Massachusetts to get a smallpox vaccine or be fined. And that mandatory requirement was upheld a long time ago, but nonetheless, it could be controlling. There was also in 2019 mandated that everyone 6 months or older in New York City had to be vaccinated for measles if they went to work, went to school, or lived in a certain zip code. And that too was upheld. So from that, we might infer that mandatory vaccinations will withstand objections that people have, whether it's religious objections or whatever else it might be. So those are some of the issues that have resulted, legal issues that have resulted from the pandemic. I hope I didn't speak too long. Happy to answer questions. I'm not sure what to do from here.
People, Carol, Teagarden, are there questions in the chat box?
There were no questions in the chat box. So if anyone has any questions, you can unmute yourselves and we can go to take a look at the gallery. I suppose we could get rid of the screen sharing so maybe we can all see each other a little bit better.
Yeah.
There we go.
There is a question in the chat box.
Oh, travel.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Could you, the comment on travel insurance, was that the question?
No, it says, can Biden enforce a mask mandate nationally?
I believe based on those two cases, the one from 1905 involving smallpox and the New York City one involving measles, that there is a good argument that yes, he can.
Interesting.
And there is one on commenting on travel insurance. Can you comment on travel insurance briefly?
Yes. So yes, maybe yes. I think I'm guessing that it's sort of like business interruption insurance. A lot of people invested in this business interruption insurance, which it covers you if your business cannot carry on business and you have a financial loss. Many of the insurance companies are saying pandemics are not covered. They're doing it based on some of the wording from the insurance contracts. Some insurance contracts specifically reference viruses, many don't. They exclude acts of God. Is this an act of God? That's not clear. And then there's also the issue of most of those contracts require there be property damage to the business, because usually the insurance kicks in with weather events, floods and hurricanes and roofs flying off and windows being broken in a hotel, a variety of reasons why business can't be carried on. So there's a lot of argument and creative argument about what the wording in those contracts mean. So the issue would be similar with travel insurance. You would have to look at what's covered and what's not covered. And then there's the question, if viruses aren't specifically included or excluded, does that mean, if they're not specifically referenced, what does that mean? Does that mean they're included? Does it mean they're excluded? It's a tricky area. I think going forward, now that we've had our pandemic, every single contract, insurance contract, whether it's travel insurance, business insurance, will reference the pandemic and viruses and all sorts of types of illnesses that can give rise to a pandemic. So everything depends on the wording. Very interesting. If I can take one more minute, the World Trade Center. It's sadly the towers went down. There was a big insurance issue. The insurance covered those towers for a certain amount per incident. So the companies, conglomerate that owned the towers, of course, argued there were two incidents. Two separate planes hit two separate towers. The insurance company argued it was one incident because, yes, two planes, but they were working together. It was one objective to bring the towers down. So, and of course, nobody anticipated what happened. So insurance contracts are the subject, the wording of insurance contracts are the subject of many a lawsuit. Any other questions?
Great presentation.
Thanks. Thanks. I hope you all learned some and
Oh my gosh,
found
yes.
it interesting, and it was fun to spend the evening with you.
Yeah, thank
You're
you
a
so
wonderful
much.
teacher.
You are a wonderful teacher.
Yeah, your students are lucky.
Thanks. I hope everybody is well, and I hope we get through this soon, and I hope we don't have too many more issues growing out of this pandemic.
Carol?
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Carol, any final words from Carol or Carol?
Just thank you so much, Karen, for an excellent presentation as always. And I also wanted to welcome all of the Hadassah members who are joining us tonight too. We have several people from Hadassah, so we're delighted to have you and welcome.
Thank you.
And any other comments or questions from anybody?
Perhaps you'd like to say what's coming up next, Carol?
Well, that's undecided at the moment. As soon as I know, I'll let you know.
Stay tuned.
Actually, Carol Teagarden is working on something. I don't know, Carol, if you want to.
Well, we're not too far along, so I probably
Okay.
won't say anything
Right.
yet, but as soon as we have a commitment, we'll put something out. It would
Okay.
be a very, very interesting, exciting program.
Yes.
Possibly in January.
Musical. But we will let you know.
Thank you, Judge Morris.
Thank you, Karen.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night. Thanks for
Thank you,
having
everybody,
me.
for coming.
Good night, everybody.
Yes, thank you,
so
everybody,
much.
for joining us.
Good seeing you all.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.